Good afternoon, all those who are joining. We're going to give folks a little bit of time. It's 3 o'clock here on the Eastern time zone, and we're really excited to get started with you. As we see folks trickling in, welcome. You know, Sarah, this is where some theme music would be good, just as folks are coming in. It's
I
quiet
know.
for us, but they might be playing music in their own homes. Who knows?
You're always so good at that.
It's not Christmas, so the playlist is not as easy to come up with today. For those just joining us, it's 3:01. We started at 3 o'clock, but we haven't started yet because we want to give folks a chance to join us and be present and hear all that we have to say. We're going to give it another minute or so just as folks continue logging in and joining us. We're so glad you're with us today.
So Renee, you got a joke you can share with the group?
Oh, it's a terrible question to ask me. My jokes are terrible. I have little niece and a little niece and nephew, and so they think everything I say is funny. Did you play Super Mario Brothers growing up?
Yes.
Okay, so what are Mario's favorite kinds of pants?
I don't remember.
Denim, denim, denim. Denim pants. There you go. That
love it.
is
I walked right into that, didn't I?
Terrible joke. See, so do you have a joke to start us off?
No.
You're like, because you can't beat the denim joke. That's what it is.
That's right. Right. I can't top that. Can't top it.
Well, today, ladies and gentlemen, we're so glad you're joining us. Thank you for saying yes to this webinar. We hope it's worth your while, and we are able to provide some great resources for you. It's the first Ministry Architects webinar of the new year. We've titled it New Year, New Jobs, How to Hire in 2021, because 2020 was such a crazy year. And it's spilling over a bit into 2021. The pandemic has touched pretty much every area of the church world, including how we hire. So today, we're hoping to provide some specific ideas around how you can run a successful search process, how to meet candidates that are worth interviewing and potentially bringing on your staffs. And we'll also talk a little bit about what success means in your context. I'm Renee. My name's Renee Wilson. I've been with Ministry Architects here a little over 3 years. Love working with our team. Prior to joining this organization, I was a school psychologist. I've worked as a youth minister, an executive administrator for a church plant. So I've been in a lot of different roles in the church world. And I am joined by our wonderful search manager, Sara Bailey, who runs and leads our search team department here at Ministry Architects. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about herself and what you can expect today.
Hey, everybody. I'm Sara, like she said, and I'm a lead consultant here at Ministry Architects. And like Renee said, the search manager, and get to work with a really, really awesome team of search consultants. I've been with Ministry Architects for about 15 years now, and love working for Ministry Architects. Before that, I was in youth ministry, and that was my calling career right out of college. Still love hanging out with teenagers. Just love hanging out with folks in ministry. And this is just a great opportunity to be with you guys today. And so we're thankful for the 45 minutes or so that we get to hang out with you. I do have like a little bit of a checklist from Sean. Sean's in the background here of things that I need to cover for the webinar format. So let me walk through those real quick with you. Before we jump in, we're going to spend about half an hour talking about ideas and tips on how to conduct the best search in 2021. And while we're talking, feel free to add questions to the chat feature. Sean, like I said, is our tech person. If you have any tech problems, you can send him a message. You can pop those questions in the chat feature. He'll monitor those and keep up with those and save them to the end for us. And if you see a question that comes in that somebody has asked that you like, that you want to ask or make sure it gets asked, give it one of those little clicks of an upvote so that we know that that's a popular question, and we'll put that more to the top of the list. And then after the first half hour, we'll spend time answering your questions. We've got some that we received ahead of time, so we'll tackle those as well. So we are looking forward to it. Finally, 2 things. There's a recording of this webinar that will be available. So if you missed it today, it will get sent to everybody who registered for the webinar. The second thing is, for joining us today, you get to have the opportunity to spend 30 minutes on the phone with Renee or myself, free, to talk about your search. Because many of you might be thinking about doing a search, you might be in the middle of a search right now, and we'd be happy to just talk about your specific context and answer any questions we can for you. So be sure to put your name and email in the chat feature, and we will be following up with you. Thanks.
Yeah, and to give you just a little bit of background, Ministry Architects has worked with over 1,000 churches in our 17 years of existence. 5 years into that existence, we began search work. So for 12 years, we've been working with churches all over the country. And I love in the chat box seeing we've got folks here from Tennessee, Illinois, California, all over. And we're going to be able to provide, we think, some really good helpful tips no matter where you are in your context. So in the search world, we've worked with 264 churches, and Sara has been with us through them all, which is crazy, Sara. Given that, I'm curious, what are the 3 biggest tensions that you've seen search teams wrestle with when it comes to looking for a new staff person?
Yeah, that's a great question. 3 things. I would say one is figuring out the role that you're searching for. A lot of times people will have different ideas of what that role should be. And you want to make sure you get clarity before you start that job search, and make sure that description is pretty clear about what's expected. Another tension is just anxiety about the search. So at certain points along the way, this anxious levels go up a little bit. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But yeah, anxiety is a big one about the search. Will we find anybody? How long will it take? And so forth. And then I think the one other question that people always worry about is, are we likable? Is anybody going to want to work at our church? And we would say, yes, of course they are. So, and Renee, you just wrote a blog that has something to do with this. So you want to tell us a little about it?
I did, sure. Yeah, if you go to the Ministry Architects website, you'll see a blog post called "How to Not Run a Bait and Switch Search Process," because oftentimes it's one of the sources of the anxiety. But does someone want to come work for us? We think we're pretty okay, but will they want to be here? And one of the biggest difference makers I've seen I've not run 260 searches, but I have run my share. One of the biggest difference makers in terms of alleviating this tension is when a church is able to articulate who they are because they know, and they're proud of that, and they know that they're a place for their community and a place where a new leader would want to be a part of. And the sooner that we can get that out to candidates and let them know, the better they'll be able to, consider for themselves and their family, would I be a fit in that place? Is that a place where my wiring would be of benefit to the church and the kingdom? So.
Thanks. I think Sean put the link in the chat feature to that blog if anybody wants to check it out. So I think I saw that pop up on the screen a few seconds ago. Thanks, Sean.
Fun. So I have some more questions. And for those joining us today, this is how we're going to kind of go through this. We've got some questions we know you are just common questions most people ask. So we want to walk through those at the start. The 3 tensions is really important, because the sooner we can alleviate those when we work with churches, the more successful their search will be, because anxiety can be out of the way, the definition of the role can be out of the way, self-confidence and who they are as a church can be out of the way, and they can focus on the work of meeting people. So let's walk through those 3 tensions just a little bit more. The first one, figuring out your role. What are some things a church needs to do before even publicizing a role?
Right. Well, clarity, that is the buzzword here. You want to be absolutely clear about what you expect in this role. For a pastor search, you want to decide, okay, is this pastor going to be an administrative role, or is it going to be somebody who focuses on preaching and teaching, or is it going to be somebody who has a more pastoral role? Figuring out what that is and nailing that down ahead of time is just so key when you start looking at candidates. I would say for youth ministry, kind of the same thing. Do you want somebody who is behind the scenes, kind of equipping up volunteers, writing curriculum, or do you want somebody who is just out there with youth wherever they are in relational ministry? So it's defining for you guys what that role is and just getting good clarity on that.
Now, that's a general tip of the trade, but we're in 2021. So
Mhm.
how have you seen the pandemic really affect how a church defines roles?
Yeah, we've seen some more churches look at other characteristics. And I think one of the biggest ones is adaptability and flexibility. I think everybody knows, we've been in this pandemic for a year. Life has not been real predictable. And so things need to change, and the church is changing. And so they're looking for folks who can deal with that change and be flexible in how they do ministry. I think another one is tech knowledge. That's very, very helpful. If you can, basics about technology is great. Definitely, you need to know how to use social media, but that's really important too. I think the final thing I would say is creativity or thinking outside the box, because a lot of people have had to do that this past year in the pandemic. And so churches are really looking for that. How have candidates done that in their context?
I hear you. I've seen that. But I think a lot of church leaders, they get tripped up by this requirement that someone has to be creative, or that they themselves need to be creative, because creativity sometimes tends to run dry. So are there still roles for people in the church who might not describe themselves as creative?
Oh, sure, sure. There's what I would call those relational roles, and then there's those administrative roles. And you want to make sure, again, you're matching the candidate with what your job description is. And you want to lay out those expectations ahead of time. If you put somebody who's really relational behind a desk all day, that's just not going to fly for folks, for anybody, for the church, for the person. So 2020 has really forced us to recognize what are those strengths and skills that we absolutely must define for folks.
Mm. So a church taking the time to clearly identify who they're hiring and what specific skills they need that person to do. And it's okay for someone to say, you're just not a fit, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So the
Yeah.
second tension that you mentioned is anxiety, which I think most people have probably experienced at least a moment of anxiety in the past year, right?
Hey, just a few.
Especially if they're in leadership, which many of the folks joining us today are. So, search specifically, what have you found really drives anxiety in the search world?
Mhm. I think a lot of churches think that they can't function without the staff person. They maybe shut down programs or cut back on what's offered because they're just anxious about, we can't do this without somebody. And we would say, yeah, you can. Yeah, create that interim plan. And we've certainly helped churches in the search process do that. But map out that plan. What's going to look like, and if you even have the gift of doing that before the staff person leaves, that's
Mhm.
even better. So that everybody knows as soon as this person is on to their next adventure, this is how things are going to continue. So that will help lower that anxiety. And then I think the other one that we see a lot is about the timeline and the expectation of how long a search could be. A lot of folks think, oh, yeah, we can find somebody in 1 month. And we would say, probably not. It takes a little bit longer than that. And that's okay, because you want to make sure you're finding the right person.
Absolutely. How has the pandemic specifically affected the anxiety of a search team or a church in general who might be hiring? Have you found that it's more or less or?
I would say a little bit less. People are more patient because they know it's going to just take some time, and that's okay. But I would also say those search teams that are really strong are the ones that really embrace their role as the search team if a church is using that to do their search. So really can make a difference.
So, defining the role, anxiety. The third tension you said was the likability of the church. What do you mean by likability of the church?
Sure, sure. People always ask, are we going to be attractive to candidates? Would somebody want to come work at our church? And yeah, we definitely say that. So the things you need to be thinking about are ways to set them up for success. And so you want to look at a couple of things. And one is, will this person or persons have a community where they're going to be coming? And just taking a look at what does our community look like and what kind of community might this person need? The other one is asking the question of what I say, what shape is your ship in? How is the ministry? And in ministry architects, we talk about the dance floor a lot. And we use this analogy. And what I mean is that we have a dancer who's very talented and creative, somebody like Mikhail Baryshnikov, who's dancing on the dance floor. And as he goes into, pirouette and lands, his foot just kind of crashes through the board. It's a riding board, it's got a hole in it, and he falls. That's the dance floor we're talking about. We want to make sure that is repaired and in good shape before we bring the dancer to us. And that will make you more attractive to churches. Candidates have told us, when we see that churches are taking care of these things, the infrastructure for ministry, that tells us a lot about that church. And so that can make you more attractive to a candidate. The other thing I would say is that candidates really appreciate or find it attractive that if the church doesn't stop doing the ministry during this interim period, they recognize that they can still continue on with an interim plan. And candidates see that and they know that, oh, wow, this church isn't looking for the superstar to come in and save everything. They're doing fine and they're looking for their next leader. So that could be really attractive to candidates as well.
So the tension of are we likable to church is pretty easy to resolve if you can answer some of those questions and continue on in the work while you're searching for the next leader. Now, a related question, which might not have as much to do with likability, but it definitely, aligns in terms of fittedness, is what about particular stances? How important is it to candidates to know where a church stands on particular stances and issues? Maybe that's biblical interpretation or consideration of theological application. How important is it to candidates that a church knows where they stand, articulates that? Even something like how they've approached this pandemic. What have we found to really be important?
Yeah, if I were a candidate, I would want to know those things on the front end. So I think it's really important that churches articulate where they do stand on these things. In our process, we ask those questions on the front end so that when a candidate asks us, we can say, this is where the church stands. And, a candidate has to figure out where they stand and be able to articulate that as well. And that might take a little self-exploration, to make sure that this is how this is what I believe and why. And being able to say that to a search team or a church during an interview.
So it's 2021.
Mm-hmm.
People are really worn out from living in this unexpected, every day is a new thing kind of way. Should a church post a job right now? And should a candidate apply?
Oh, yeah. Yes. And yes, most definitely. Don't let the pandemic hold you back at all. We've completed a lot of searches this past year and continue to do so. So don't let that hold you back. This is a great period of change that the church is in, universally. And it's just a great opportunity to kind of rethink the role. And at the same time, it's also a tough time for candidates. Folks might feel like they're called away from their position, and they may need to do a little more self-exploration again about, why would I be searching for a job right now in the middle of a pandemic? Not that we say you don't, but just be clear on why you are.
So it's no secret Ministry Architects loves to work with churches. We've been doing it for 17 years, over 1,000 churches. With all the resources we've provided, and for those listening, if you haven't checked out our website in the past year, you definitely should. As a boots on the ground minister myself, we provided COVID resources, ideas for children, youth, whole church, and searches. Just this past month alone, we've got the blog link in the chat. We've had podcast episodes, social media tips of the trade, and this webinar. So Sara, we're providing all this stuff for free for churches because we just want to help. Mm-hmm. Why would they hire us to be a part of their search process?
That's a great question. We can do a lot for a search process. One is bring clarity, and what it takes to get to clarity is we spend a lot of time listening to folks at the church. We want to understand who they are and know their culture. So we do our homework to really get clarity on who they are so we can communicate that in our search process. The other piece is we carry the load of the work. For the first 6 to 8 weeks of a search process, the search team doesn't have to do a whole lot, or the church. We're doing all that. We're doing all the legwork to promote the position, to vet candidates, to make sure they're the right match. And then we end up with a top group, group of top candidates that we present to the church. And then that's when the search team really begins a lot of their work, is at that point. And so we kind of hand them these candidates and say, here you go for interviews. But we don't, leave them high and dry. We keep coaching them and supporting them through the rest of the search process, through all the interviews, on-site interviews, offers, salary. I mean, all of that. We help from very beginning to the very end. And so those are a couple things. But the biggest thing is networking. Networking is huge, huge, huge for the success of a search. It takes a lot of time, and a lot of churches, either staff or volunteers who might be serving on a search team, they may not have hours on end to give to making phone calls. And so we can do that for you. 70% of the time, somebody is found, the person hired is found through somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. So that networking is just crucial to any search process. And we've got great networks through Ministry Architects and can carry that piece for you.
I'm guessing you'd say our process works.
Yeah.
Why would you say our process works?
A couple of things. I would say that the tenure of the folks that we help hire is about 3 years, and longevity is really important. We would love to see longer, but we know in church work that sometimes those tenures are shorter. So we're finding success that way. The other thing is that we're more than just a search process. That beginning part of the clarity and listening, we are looking at the big picture, the whole picture of the church and the ministry. We're looking at staffing structure. So we're not just filling a position, we're looking at that dance floor. We're looking at all the systems and processes that need to be in place. We're helping the church with their vision and so forth. So we're looking at the big picture in a search process. And then I would say one more thing. We have this really awesome guarantee that we tell folks when they bring us on to partner with them. If somebody leaves within the first year of being hired, we will redo the whole search for free. That's how confident we are in our process.
That's right. And it's a rare occasion when that happens, and it's typically totally unfortunate.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating. And folks listening, if you wonder why we're even talking about it, and we veered a little away from the tensions, it's because creating a search process on your own is in of itself work. And going through all the phases and the steps of a search process takes people investing time and energy and resources that you might be looking at your master calendar of your church going, I just don't see how we're going to make room. I just don't see how we're going to do it amidst everything else we're doing right now, especially while we're still living in the socially distant global pandemic kind of viewpoint of a world. So we wanted to be able to maybe help lighten your load by sharing. We've got some good ways of going about this. And I'd love just one more question related to this, and then we're going to dive into some questions we've gotten from you who've registered ahead of time, and then those that you lift up. Sara, what is our portfolio? Because I think sometimes when folks learn about Ministry Architects, they think they only work with denominational churches, or they only work with small, rural, or suburban churches. So can you tell a little bit about, of the thousands we've worked with, what those look like?
Yeah, we work with non-denominational churches. We work with denominations. I think we've worked as a company with over 26 different denominations across the country, small church, rural church, big church, multi-site church, mega church, all of them. We have worked with all of them. And I would think Sean is going, this might be his cue, Sean. He's going to share in the chat box or the chat feature some quotes from folks and some statistics. So you don't have to listen to us talk about them. We can jump to your questions.
Your reader, absolutely. And while Sean is sharing that information, I'll just remind you, for those who have your menu bar at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A feature. We've got one in there right now in the queue. Feel free to ask any questions. And then again, if you see a question that you want answered, just go ahead and like it or upvote it. Before we take that first one, just in case anyone has to leave our webinar a little early today, Sarah, if there's one thing you would want folks to know from today, what would that be?
Don't let the pandemic hold you back. Don't let it keep you from looking for the staff that you feel you need at your church. And then the other thing I would say is make sure you have clarity. You're going to get tired of me saying that. Clarity is so important in defining what's expected of that person. So clarity and don't hold back.
Great. So let's take some questions. All right, Mark Lampley wrote this. We're in need of more candidates. Thankfully, we've gotten a couple names to start with, but they've not worked out. In addition to networking within our congregation, presbytery, neighboring presbyteries, and denominational matching system, plus other contacts from our youth director, we still want to learn more places to advertise. Our dozen candidates are nowhere near our numerical expectation of our pool after having advertised for 3 months. What would you say to Mark?
I would say, remember I talked about that anxiety that starts arising along in the search. A lot of churches will hit that 3-month mark and go, oh my gosh, we haven't found anybody. And they get really anxious, and then they start compromising what they're looking for, and they just fill the position. We call that an anxious hire. We don't want you to fill the gap just because you need to fill the gap. We want you to find the right candidate for your congregation. So I would say that. And I would say keep working those networks. Again, that is so important. You're doing a lot of that already really, really well. So kudos to you guys for doing that. But continue to do that. And you might think about doing it outside your denomination. I would even suggest calling youth directors, if it's a youth position, at other churches that you know have successful youth programs. And they can be in another city, another state, or they can be down the street. Just calling those folks, those youth directors or youth pastors, and saying, hey, who do you know? Because they might know somebody who is looking for a position. You never, ever know. And then I would also think about any colleges, universities, seminaries that might be nearby. You might find somebody through those avenues, talk to their career offices as well. The alumni division, make those connections there as well. And then a lot of people do this, and I'm just probably, makes sense, but look within your own congregation. Oftentimes churches value building up people in ministry, and you might have somebody who grew up in the program who feels called to youth ministry, but may not have a lot of experience under their belt. And that might be a really good person for a co-director, depending on that job description. But there might just be somebody in your midst who God is just placing there to let you take on and mentor and help them grow into successful ministry.
That's right. Meredith Brown asked a question in our Q&A box that's a little bit related. She says, what kinds of tips do you have for hiring administrative office staff right now? A little bit different than program staff, which we do focus a lot on youth ministers, children's ministers, pastors, worship leaders. And I think, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, we'd offer the same advice. You want clarity of role. You want to make sure they're a fit for your community, and networking within those in your church, in your community. If it's a financial role, what accountants in town can you call to see if they have anyone coming up, right? If it's a bookkeeping role or a database role, are there local colleges or even like the high school teacher at school that teaches tech? Do they know someone, a recent graduate, again, that you could access? It's some similar approaches, even though the role might look a little different. Would you say?
Yeah, I totally agree. You nailed it.
Okay. But Meredith, that's a great question, because oftentimes we also segregate the types and styles of roles in our churches, when really at the core, you're looking for someone who works well with others and can get the job done. So keep that in mind. Sarah, next question comes from Mark Kuhn. It's a two-parter. What are the most efficient processes for streamlining the hiring process from beginning to end? And are there any just killer non-traditional interview questions that you find particularly fruitful?
Sure. Streamlining, I'll talk about that first. I would say two things. One, you want to map out a timeline for your search and set some deadlines within that timeline that we're going to reach this point by this date. And just lay that out so everybody kind of has a full picture of, okay, here are the steps we're going to take and about the time frame it's going to happen. The other thing is that you're going to need somebody to be the driver of that process, who is helping to keep folks on task and remind them about things, and say, hey, we've got this coming up. So somebody who's kind of keeping an eye on things and moving things forward. So I'd say that about the streamlining. Non-traditional questions, that's a good one. I would say first that one thing that we do in Ministry Architects is we use a personality type indicator tool, and it helps us to learn more about the candidate. It's not just score them like high or low or on anything, but it's just for us to get a better understanding of their work style. And from that, we can ask even more pointed questions in interviews that are specific to that person's style. And you could see, is this person going to fit in a team, or is this person going to work better on their own? So there are a lot of things you can look at with that personality tool. There's a lot of them out there that you can use, but they're very, very helpful, and they give all kinds of good questions to ask in an interview process. So that's kind of how I respond. I bet Renee's got some good questions for us.
Well, I was going to say, with the streamlining question mark, Sarah's exactly right. Set those dates and set those markers, and make sure the person running the process knows they're trying to hit those. But sometimes concentrating that work into phases helps a team wrap their head around, right? So phase 1 might be praying, networking, and collecting resumes. Phase 2 might be initial interviews and vetting. Phase 3 might be on-site experiences and decision-making. But if you can say, because then you can celebrate, hey, we've collected, 25 resumes. That's to be celebrated. And our next task is really interviewing those individuals. And you can walk with folks through that. I also think you can't under-communicate. While your team might hold confidential information about a candidate, your larger church is curious too, because they know you're hiring. So phases allow you not to say, we've got, 8 deadlines to make, but hey, we're in the first phase and about to move into the second. And they can say, how many phases? 3. And it really gives people a sense of movement, accomplishment, but also encouragement that someone's joining your team who's going to continue to help move your church forward towards its vision. And that's always just a real community lifter. Non-traditional questions I love to talk about, because some of my favorite questions to ask are the non-traditional ones. Yes, you want to know a person's capabilities, so please don't skip over skill set questions. We find it more and more valuable, especially with, I would say, maybe millennial generations and younger. They're looking for roles where they can be a fit in a community. So you're going to want to ask character style questions, such as, what do you do for fun? What do you do to connect personally with Jesus? What are your weekly spiritual disciplines or rhythms? What energizes you after a long week where it's really tiring? Look, Jesus is just shining in on my face right now. The sun's shining today. But yeah, asking those questions help you learn who the person is. I know Sarah's got a great one she asks to learn a little bit more about the personal side of a candidate.
Yeah. I always like asking this question. What is on your refrigerator? Not in it, but on it. And it's always fun to hear what people have on their refrigerators.
Yeah. So don't skip the capability questions, but the fun non-traditional ones are, you're going to have to work with this person and spend a lot of time with them in the trenches in a relational way. So don't skip vetting that in a less intensive, more truly learning their heart kind of way.
Awesome. Brilliant.
You want to take the next
one? All right. Yep, I've got the next one. This is from somebody who says, I'm an associate pastor at a blah, blah, blah church and blah, blah, blah. And our current youth director is retiring soon. And we're wanting to use this transition as an opportunity to retool our church's culture and approach to reaching Generation Z. One question revolves around a ministry that assists with a child's or youth transition from elementary to youth years. So the question they're asking is, should we consider hiring a 5th, 6th grade level minister that could help with this transition? Renee, I'm gonna let you answer.
Yeah, no, we got this question ahead of time and I loved it because you are thinking really outside the box. How many churches do you know that have a minister specifically for 5th and 6th graders, that intermediate level? So first of all, what an opportunity. Second of all, you've got time to consider what the role could be. which is exactly the help you need to get clarity that we were talking about early on, and that, Sara continues to bring up, which is fantastic. So here's what I'd say. The key to bridging most any transition, but especially with young people, is going to be the strongest trusted relationships that they can lean on and look to. I think if you're thinking about putting a team in place, the staff member would still have to lead the team. So you have an opportunity here to, like Sara said earlier, continue doing the work, continue building the dance floor before the person arrives. But could this be an opportunity for, maybe if you can get volunteers to give a 2-year commitment, and you have a set for 4th and 5th grade, you have a set for 6th and 7th grade. Now you have a staff member sort of collaborating on the ends, but overseeing the middle. But with the student, they're walking with a volunteer through 2 years and then 2 years. And they're, we talk about stickiness out of Fuller Youth Institute, that stickiness of the relationship helps them get through those rougher, I want to step away kind of years, because they're connected to a person, not just a place, not just a program. And so I love the intentionality, the caring for the kids during that transition. And there's incredible benefits to your team. I mean, potentially you would establish a whole new way of doing ministry that isn't as segmented as I'm the 5th and 6th grade pastor, as it is, oh, you know what? We work as a team. We've got someone a little bit more focused on children, a little bit more focused on high school. And I get to help bridge the gap, but we all work together. That has a lot of benefits to it.
Definitely. Great answer. So the second part of their question has to do with churches who are doing things differently or different from traditional youth programming, again, to reach and make resilient disciples of Generation Z. So how should the search and hiring process play into these questions?
A fun phrase is find a captain for the ship, not a ship for the captain. So this plays off the dance floor analogy that Sara used. But what you want to do is build the program, no matter what your age group is, and then find a fit to lead it. Don't look for a leader and then build the ship around him or her, because that person might leave, might transition, might change their mind, might learn a new approach in 18 months and want to change the whole ship around, when really the stability of what's happening at the church, the leader gets to come in and help lead and guide and facilitate and add on to, but the structure of it in its inception gets to stay consistent and firm, and everyone's agreed to that and bought into that vision. It's why hiring one person, isn't about just one person and one role. In a sustainable model of ministry, you're looking at the whole picture every time and how everything works together. So whether it's resilient disciples in Generation Z, or it's, intergenerational connections, working with the nursery and your elderly and saying, how can these two be in each other's lives more? The question is, what does the ship look like? And then how can you invite people to board it?
Good analogy. I like that.
Thanks. I'm looking at our Q&A. I don't see additional questions. So we've got a couple other common questions that we've heard folks ask when they're into the search work. One of them is, Sara, and this, particularly in the pandemic, has been a little bit more interesting to navigate. What are the benefits of doing an on-site, in-person interview?
Lots of benefits to doing that. Obviously meeting the candidate face to face, and they're interviewing you just as much as you're interviewing them, and they get to check out and try you on, so to speak, and see, is this going to be a right fit for me or for my family? I would also say it's a good chance to see how the person interacts in ministry. And so you might ask them to lead something while they're on site as part of an interview process. And we've done that, or helped churches do that real creatively during the pandemic. We've had to look at ways of, okay, if we can't do this in person, how are we going to do it? Most likely through Zoom. And so, we see things like, like a children's director candidate lead a story time or a short lesson on Zoom with children. Same thing with youth, or just one church, had youth come up with questions to ask their person, and they just got on Zoom and had a conversation. So it's a great way to get to know the person. But being on site is obviously ideal in any kind of search process, because you want to know, does this fit for us? And it's the best way to figure that out is being in person.
Well, and those virtual interview opportunities are important, because if your church is not back to meeting in person in any way, shape, or form, if you were to hire during this season, the individual you hire needs to be able to show the virtual versatility, essentially.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to vet that in a way.
And I would add one other thing. Some places can have small gatherings or small groups. And so we've seen a few churches kind of do what I call the speed dating version of an interview. And they might have a candidates, and I think a lot of places they did it outdoors. They were able to be outside, just kind of parked somewhere and with a couple of search team members, and they kind of had a schedule of families coming through to meet that person. And so it wasn't a large gathering. People were kind of scheduled, and everybody got opportunity to interact with that person. So there's definitely some real creative ways to do it on site as well, and be socially distanced and safe.
And we've been brainstorming with churches for the past 11 months about how to bring someone on site. If you're in a warm climate or a cold climate, if you're in person or not. Again, having an outside person give some inside insight can be really helpful in a process, especially now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
last question, Sarah, which I love. What are some of the more unexpected questions we've gotten from candidates for churches to answer?
I would say a lot of times the candidate has questions about the stance, and where a church stands on some things. That's pretty standard. A lot of times it's about salary or the benefits package. We've gotten a lot of questions around that. A lot of times folks are really exploring the makeup of a congregation, the demographics of a congregation. They might ask questions about that too. And we always say, be honest about who you are. And so those are a few. Renee, what do you got?
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting questions I've received is, are there already networks of other children's ministers, worship leaders in the area that I can connect with? Does your church have a good relationship with other churches, essentially? One question that I loved is, what are your bridges already to your schools in the community? Now, again, I work a lot with the children and youth ministry searches, but they're thinking through that. What have you already done? What kind of, reputation do you have in your town? A more family-based consideration that one candidate asked was, does the church look like its neighbors, its physical neighbors? Do the physical neighbors in that community go to the church? And does it look like that? Or do most church people live really far away from the church itself? So a really healthy, thoughtful, I want to plant some roots and be there for a while candidate, they're going to ask some good character questions of the church, not just capabilities as how they can join a team and build the kingdom. And I love it when they think that way, because it helps the church start thinking about some things too, which is always a good thing when iron sharpens iron.
Right. I had one other point and I've lost it. So I think we should wrap up with that.
That sounds like a good plan. For those joining us and for those watching this post the webinar, again, we'd love to connect with you. If you haven't had a chance to put your information in the chat box, feel free to email either one of us, Sarah Bailey or Renee Wilson. Our emails are in the chat box. We love communicating with folks and talking about not just search, but how you can look at the broader picture and vision for your church. And if you go to the Ministry Architects website, you're going to see all the consultants and team members all across the country who would just love to serve you and your communities. We'll email the recordings out. And I think that marks all the things Sean told us to say.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. We hope this was really helpful. And like Renee said, please reach out. We're happy to answer questions, because we know it can be a struggle. And so just, we're here for you. So thanks for being with us. We really do appreciate you taking the time out today.
And blessings on your search or hire.
Yeah, good luck.